Hello, everyone. This is Mentor Lawyer. And tonight, going into the early morning hours of tomorrow, we will do a deep dive video. And what that means is if you just want to watch, for example, closing arguments and watch them for yourself without any commentary, then you have that available on my channel. And in fact, I'm actually right now uploading a nice edited version with improved sound, really good quality, and I'll probably publish that tomorrow. So if you just want to watch or rewatch Georgia Kappelman's closing arguments in the Donna Adelson case, you can just do that. This particular video is more of a deep dive, which is something that I like to do. And that's how I study a case. And in this particular case, I'm still interested in the Donna Adelson case. We know that the case involving the murder of FSU law professor Donna Markel may not be over. There may be additional people charged. So I've been thinking about what potential charges other defendants could face, including, of course, the main person that everybody wants to talk about is Wendy Adelson. But this video is not about that, although I have some good ideas about that issue, but that's not this video. This video is really just a study of the case against Donna Adelson because initially there were some doubts about the case, and maybe the prosecutors themselves had some concerns about the case from the very beginning, right? William Eggs had concerns about the case against Donna Adelson and Charles Adelson, but eventually they cleared up the recording at the Dolce Vita and felt secure in a prosecution against Charles Adelson. He made a lot of statements during that conversation at the restaurant that could be used against him. And eventually, of course, they also had the testimony, the direct testimony of Katie Magbanua, which, of course, William Eggs didn't have that when he initially was declining prosecution against the Adelsons. So things changed over time and made the cases better. And the case against Charles Adelson, of course, got much better once the state of Florida secured the conviction against Catherine Magbanua, and she decided finally to cooperate with the state and gave two proffers. In the situation with Donna Adelson, there was very flimsy evidence that directly would put her in the conspiracy stage, right? During the time period in question, which would be before the murder, during the murder, or immediately after the murder in regards to compensation. And that testimony came from Catherine Magbanua eventually. So once they had that testimony, they still didn't charge Donna, but they had the testimony from Katie, which was offered at Charlie's trial, which was much better and more concise and more well-prepared than whatever she said during her proffers. Those proffers were just awful to listen through. There was just a lot of rambling and almost nothing solid. And it probably would take a person with a lot of patience, like a detective, to listen to it a few times and get something out of it, or prosecutors as well, and the prosecution team. And they did that and eventually got clarifications and prepared Katie to testify at Charles Adelson's trial. And she came up with a few surprises, at least they were surprises to me. I don't remember some of the things that she said at Charles Adelson's trial being in those proffers, but maybe I just missed them because she was rambling so much that maybe I just missed them. And it was a pain to listen through them, so I kind of didn't want to restudy those proffers. But in any case, so just the testimony from Katie didn't seem to be enough. But then, of course, Donna made things easier for the state. She decided to flee the country to Vietnam and to make statements to others in recorded conversations that maybe she knew was recorded. Well, I mean, obviously she knew that the jail calls were recorded, but she didn't know that the phone didn't hang up. So she made some statements there. So in essence, she made the case even stronger for the state and pushed the envelope, pushed the urgency of the state of Florida to charge her by attempting to flee to Vietnam. Of course, we knew that the state probably wanted to see how things went with Charles Adelson's trial, And at the conclusion of the trial, they said, hey, stay tuned as to whether or not there were going to be more prosecutions. And like I said, in essence, Donna stepped up to the plate herself. So she was charged, and then we are getting ready for trial. Oh, Enzo, what's going on? So we're getting ready for trial, and then something shocking happens, right? At the first day of jury selection. Hey, what's going on? What's going on, buddy? What are you so stressed about? Here, you can just be for him here. It's all right. Unless there's somebody trying to get in the house. Is that what's going on? Here. Enzo, you're on the channel. What's going on outside? Is there somebody outside? No? Okay. Anyway, sorry for that interruption. Thank you so much, Victoria. I appreciate that very much. And I enjoyed that interview with Mr. Detective Isom. So anyway, where were we before Enzo interrupted? Which one is the dog? That's a very good question. All right, I'm the dog. This is an alien from another planet. So then we have this curiosity of what happened when Donna Adelson was supposed to go to trial herself a year before, right? Her attorneys were Dan Roshbaum and Alex Morris. She was ready to go for trial. And then we find out on the first day of trial, there's whole debacle, this whole issue of Charles Adelson being put on the witness list by the state, Charles Adelson not wanting to testify, his appellate attorney, Mr. Michael Offerman, and his new partner, a female lady that I always forget her name, but they advised to the court that there were issues with the consent given by Charles Adelson to Dan Roshbaum to represent his mom after he had represented Charlie at his trial. And so there was this whole debacle, which could have so easily been solved if the state of Florida said, we're not going to call Charles Adelson to the witness stand. Like they didn't do it in this trial, right? So way back to then, they didn't need to use Charles Adelson. They could have used adoptive admissions, which is what they did in this case, and not put Charles Adelson on the witness stand. So in essence, by putting him on the witness list and insisting that they were going to call him or that they might call him in the rebuttal case, the prosecution forced the hand. The attorney for Charles Adelson says no consent because they're going to argue down the line in a motion for post-conviction relief that there was ineffective assistance of counsel. They're going to argue that Dan Roshbaum had his heart in representing Donna and not Charlie. And of course, later Donna will say that the whole time, Dan Roshbaum had his heart with Charlie and not Donna. So all that the conflict of interest issues, we'll still hear about all of them in the next few years. And in fact, I think one of the big issues in the appeal for Donna Adelson will be that particular issue, the whole fact that her attorneys were removed, and not only that they were removed, but that then she had no access to the work that they had done for a whole year that she had paid for, not only by the lawyers, but also by the investigators. So that could become an issue on appeal as well. But this video, which I'm talking so much before I actually started, is about the closing arguments by Georgia Kappelman. And actually, I was listening to the closing arguments earlier, studying, while I was cooking, while I was doing my laundry, while I was doing some home tasks. And as I was listening to it and taking notes, I said, hey, why don't I do a video instead, watch with you guys? Because while I was doing all this other work and listening to the closing arguments, I couldn't read what was being shown on the screen. And occasionally I would see that they were showing texts or emails, and they were not reading them in full. They were just showing them and just maybe reading a very small snippet of the text for the point that they were trying to make. Thank you so much, Elias. I appreciate that very much. So I decided, hey, I'm alone with Enzo. My son is sleeping. Rest of the family is out of the country. So why not do a late live with you guys? And that's where you come in. We're doing this live together. I think that my video that I did, the high quality reproduction of the closing arguments, should be uploaded, or should be almost there. We're 97%. So in a few minutes, it will be ready. But in the meantime, I'll talk to you guys here. And so go to the front and stop the bad guys. Go. See what's going on. Bark again if there's any issue. What's going on? What's going on? You want to stay here? All right. He wants to stay here with me. He wants to come up. All right. Okay. He wants to come up. So he will stay with us here. Here. He'll be talking to you guys. And so, all right. So let's go ahead and discuss what are the notes that I made so far from the closing arguments. First of all, the issue of motive, of course, was very important for the state of Florida. And it was important in the sense that they didn't just want to say Donna Adelson had motive. They wanted to use motive as a way to establish who was responsible, who wanted the Markel dead, who wanted a solution to the problem, which was Dan Markel. So I thought that the closing arguments by Georgia were very effective, started very strong, and she started talking about this issue, right? That Donna Adelson wanted to win the war on the issue of the non-negotiable, Wendy and the kids' relocation to South Florida. That was the most important thing for Donna, even more important for Donna than it was for Wendy. Wendy wasn't invested on that issue as Donna was. And therefore, the jury was shown a whole bunch of emails where Donna Adelson is pushing her daughter, forcing her daughter to fight for that, and explaining to her daughter, Wendy, how a win on that issue is so important because the rest of their lives is going to be dependent upon the result of that issue. This is a life-changing issue for Donna, and she wanted it to be a win for the Adelsons. So she did a good job on that issue, and then she moved on to the issue of Charlie, that Charlie didn't really give a damn so much about Wendy and her divorce and relocation to South Florida to compete for his mom's attention, right? He didn't care that much about that, but he did care so much about his mom. Charlie had one main woman in his life. He had a lot of girlfriends in and out of his life, but he had one main woman who helped take care of him, of his things, helped organize his life. And he also was, for her, the problem solver. So it was going both ways. So an excellent transition to Charlie and to the fact that Charles Adelson was the problem solver for his mommy. So she did a really good job on that issue. And obviously it was all supported by evidence, by communications between these people, by texts, by emails, etc. And demonstrating, for example, that Donna would keep Charlie updated on things going on in the divorce and about how it was upsetting her. All of that well done by the state. Then, again, using the emails, especially after the battle was lost in the court proceedings, the emails that came afterwards with different solutions, they were not court solutions, right? They lost the battle in court, but they wanted to find another way to win this war, this non-negotiable, the issue of relocation, through other means, not through the court. And that's where we start seeing the emails with suggestions to Wendy to be the best actress she ever was, to put all these different kinds of pressures on Dan Markel by claiming that they were going to baptize the children, by dressing them as Hitler kids, and by offering, so making suggestions even to offer $1 million as a way to convince him to let her go to South Florida. And so that again was very well done, and he showed the one thing that I loved about the closing arguments from Georgia is that she obviously modified it in light of things that happened in this trial. And the defense made so many strategic mistakes, arguing or presenting evidence on points that were unwinnable and silly and discredited the defense significantly, right? This whole issue of trying to prove that this was not, that this was like some amicable resolution issue, that the relationships between the Adelsons and Dan Markel was amicable after the court decided once and for all that Wendy was going to stay in Tallahassee. They just is like a shameless argument in a sense. I mean, you're losing all credibility with the jury when you're trying to argue that. And so those two witnesses, Kristen Adamson and Linda Bailey, the expert. So Kristen Adamson was Wendy Adelson's former attorney, the one who quit in early May, and basically because she quit, Wendy's deposition was canceled. So her testimony and Linda Bailey's testimony were just horrible and really discredited any credibility the defense might have. There are so many strategic errors from the defense, and basically just Georgia used them all so smartly in this closing argument. It is a beauty to watch, in a sense, the closing arguments, because if you watch the trial, then you get to see how Georgia picked up on all the mistakes from the defense, all the strategic mistakes. I'm not talking about legal mistakes, I'm talking about strategies, talking about arguments, or how you're going to present the evidence, or arguments or inferences you're going to try to draw from particular evidence. When they're going to try to convince the jury of the fact that this was an amicable dispute between Dan Markel and Wendy Adelson, that it wasn't contentious, right? It was not a contentious divorce. That is a ridiculous position to take. And so when you take a ridiculous position, you're basically killing your own credibility. And so in essence, I think I felt that quite a bit from my interview with Juror JC, is that Georgia Kaplan's arguments were amazing and really impactful and very strong. And I heard JC repeating many of the things that were actually included in the closing argument. So it really matched what their thought process was, and it confirmed in many ways what they were thinking, or where they were probably leaning towards as they had finished watching all the evidence and they were now just considering the arguments. And of course, JC and all the jurors would also listen to the defense. But whatever was coming from the defense didn't make almost any sense. Plus, it changed from opening statements to closing arguments. The whole strategy changed because the strategy in the very beginning fell flat on its face once the judge ruled on adoptive admissions and allowed the state of Florida to introduce all this evidence of Donna Adelson adopting the testimony of her son Charles Adelson at his trial, something that it seemed that the defense wasn't prepared for. Should have been, but wasn't. Maybe this defense, maybe the state was smart. Maybe the state was smart and not doing a motion in limine and just bringing it up during the trial, because it seemed to have caught the defense attorneys with their pants down and they didn't recover. And so I think the video must be ready. Let me take a look. Okay, it's right now, it's there and it's ready. So we can watch it. So let me just finish my initial thoughts real quick and then we can watch the video. So from my notes so far, sorry. So Donna Then Georgia goes to talking about how Donna was managing Wendy's divorce, talks about how Donna Adelson kept track of Dan's travel schedule, and so that she had the information that could have been useful for the killers. And it's interesting how she was able to use a lot of evidence of insinuations, right, of things that she didn't have anything to connect it to the conspiracy and the murder, right? She didn't have anyone testify, for example, that on the calendar from 2014 in the end, that information about the car and the tag number, that information was actually given to the killers. Nobody testified to that. She also, I don't think that anyone testified that it was Donna who gave them the information about the fact that Dan Markel was about to leave on Saturday, so she had to be killed on the 18th. Nobody testified to that. But the state was able to admit into evidence the calendar, which showed that Donna Adelson had that information and knew it, and was able to show it and argue to the jury from just that calendar entry that she had this information, which would have been essential for the killers. And I think that they did testify that they knew that Dan was going to leave the country, and so they had to get it done, but nobody had to say that it was Donna. So very skillful, very smart, defense unprepared, defense not on top of all the evidence, defense surprised by a ton of stuff. So it was a disaster, I think, of a defense. Maybe disaster is a too strong a word, but it was not very good. I liked it. I like Josh. He's a very nice guy, but in the end, watching everything and looking back, it was a very poor performance where they were caught. The state really outplayed them, and the state made the case so much better in this 1 year delay, which conspiracy theorists might think, well, maybe they already knew that there was going to be some shenanigans going on. It's almost like how did they know? But they didn't know, of course, but because they only found out about Bird and whoever else later. But anyway, so sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. And that's pretty much where I finished with my notes. My notes finished with Halloween 2013. I think I might just do a separate video about Halloween 2013. But right now, let's just go ahead and watch the closing arguments. Excuse me. And that's what we're going to do. And what I'm going to do this time that is going to be different is if there's something on the screen, that Georgia Kappelman did not read, I may pause it then and read it for you guys. So in this place, you're going to have it all. Thank you so much, Daphne. I appreciate that. All right. And so let's get started. Here, let's share the screen. Here we go.
Well, this is Dan Markel. He's the victim in this case. A son, a brother, a colleague, a mentor, a professor, a friend, but most of all, a father, an Abba, a dad, a dedicated and loving father whose downfall was brought about by the fact that his number one priority was maximizing his time with those little boys in the wake of a bitter divorce from their mother. Defense called witnesses to come in here and give you an expert opinion that his divorce and the subsequent litigation was not contentious. Not contentious to whom? It was contentious to Dan Markel. It was contentious to Wendy Adelson. And it was contentious to this defendant. And then after telling you what a great guy Dan Markel was in opening statements, they called witnesses to tell you what a pain in the butt he was. And he was a pain in the butt to those people, those awful lawyers that can't even admit that divorces are emotionally charged. He was a pain in their butts. He was a pain in Wendy's butt, and he was a pain in Donna's butt. Why? Because this was his life we were talking about. Dan Markel was not a file on some lawyer's desk. He was a real person who cared passionately about every scrap of paper in that divorce file. He wasn't some bumbling idiot. He was a Harvard-educated law professor. And yeah, he was making it as difficult as possible for this defendant to get her non-negotiable, which just also happened to be Dan Markel's non-negotiable, those two little boys. You have learned about this conspiracy and how it has unraveled over the last 11 years since Dan Markel's death. The defendants in this case have all attempted to point fingers at each other. They have argued that the state's theory is right. It's right. You got it right with everybody except for me. I didn't do it. Garcia's defense was that Charlie went directly to Rivera to arrange the hit on Dan Markel. Catherine Magbanua testified in her trial and said she had no knowledge of this murder. Charlie must have gone around her directly to Garcia. In Charlie's trial, he said Magbanua, Garcia, and Rivera all got together to kill Dan Markel without any direction from any Adelson family member. Each defendant characterized himself or herself as another victim in this case, a victim in this situation, a victim of their co-defendants, setting them up, or the appearance of evidence that seemed to implicate them but wasn't what it appeared to be. But despite their efforts to insulate themselves and to distance themselves from their co-conspirators, they made enough mistakes to get themselves caught and held accountable for their respective roles in this conspiracy. And today is Donna Adelson's turn. Despite their efforts to play victims, Dan Markel is still the only victim in this case. And the only thing he was guilty of was fighting like hell for those little boys. And he lost. He lost everything. This is what he looked like before this defendant conspired to hire a hitman to have him killed. And this is what he looked like after. The evidence has shown that on July 18th, 2014, this brilliant, accomplished, beloved man was gunned down in cold blood in his own garage. This horrific death ultimately set the police down two separate paths, following the two most promising leads that they had. The first lead was to chase down that Prius that, thank God, Mr. Geiger caught a glimpse of pulling out of the driveway that morning. And the second path was to ask, as we would with any murder investigation, who had a motive to want him dead? And within 1 hour of the shooting, well before Professor Markel had even been pronounced dead, this path was already pointing to the defendant when Wendy Adelson revealed to officers that her parents had more reason to dislike her ex than anyone else. And what offense had Mr. Markel committed against Donna Adelson and her family, refusing to let his children be taken away from him? Objecting to her telling his kids that he's stupid? The evidence has shown that Donna Adelson was all about psychological warfare, and when all else failed, she was willing to do whatever it took to accomplish her non-negotiable, to get a win. In order for you to render a verdict of guilty, the state must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that these crimes were committed and that this defendant is the person who committed the crimes, or in this case, one of the persons who committed the crimes. It is undisputed that these crimes were committed. This was a first-degree murder. No doubt about that. But who did it? The only issue left is identification, or what we call ID. The defense told you in openings, motive doesn't really matter. Don't pay attention to all the motive. Don't pay attention to all the emails. But motive can be compelling proof of who done it. Identification. And thus critical to your determination of the defendant as one of the persons that committed this crime. Despite some of the testimony that you heard, it is clear that the divorce between Wendy and Dan was contentious. Except the person who cared most about Wendy's divorce and relocation specifically wasn't Wendy. It was her mother. Charlie Adelson solicited Catherine McBanola to kill Dan Markel, but why? Who solicited Charlie? Because Charlie didn't care about the Adelson family getting a win against Dan Markel. He didn't care about relocation. He didn't care about Wendy's divorce. He cared about go-karts and jet skis and pretty girls. But he also cared about getting things done for the number one woman in his life, and that was his mother. She managed Charlie's life for him, and in return, he solved problems for her. That pattern is seen throughout this case. He talks to Wendy on the defendant's behalf to get her to pull the plug on the Tallahassee house, to date Dave and invite him to Mother's Day, to pursue a medical malpractice job, even though that's not even her area of the law, and on and on and on. She micromanaged Wendy's life. Charlie knows how to manage Wendy in a way that Donna can't, or knows how to talk to her in a way that Donna can't. And Wendy needs their help, right? Because according to them, she doesn't even have enough of a brain in her head to run her own life without their help. Donna decides what's best for everyone, and if she runs into any problems making that happen, Charlie is her go-to guy to get it done. He is the problem solver. And what was the biggest problem that Donna Adelson had in 2014? Dan Markel. Wendy filed her petition for divorce on September 10th of 2012, and the defendant was right in the middle of it. In the fall of 2012, the defendant told her son, Rob Adelson, that she had been in Tallahassee for several months, renting a new place for Wendy. She used her own maiden name to do that, to disguise the identity of who was renting it, arranging for movers, moving money around, and getting things set up for Wendy to leave Dan. Then Wendy calls Dan Markel and delivers the news that she's leaving him. How does she do it? She tells him she and the boys are moving out of the marital home, and the defendant gleefully, that was Rob's word, reported to Rob, her son, that she and Wendy strategically planned to deliver that news to Mr. Markel so that he would get this bomb dropped on him right as he's about to take the stage to deliver this lecture. According to Mr. Markel in one of his filings, quote, while the husband was away on a short business trip, the wife left the husband in the marital home, taking with her the children's furniture, clothing, toys, and whatever assets, both marital and non-marital, she desired. The evidence has shown that from the start, this defendant was very involved in managing Wendy's divorce. The children's furniture, clothing, toys.
Okay, what I did say is that I was going to read some of the documents that we're going to show on the screen. So here we have on the left-hand side of this screenshot from the PowerPoint presentation, they have the father's amended motion for enforcement of parental agreement and for electronic access to minor children pursuant to Florida statutes such and such. And then there is a arrow. I guess this is a portion of that document, and it says, while the husband was away on a short business trip, the wife left the husband and the marital home on or about September 10, 2012, taking with her the children, their furniture, clothing, and toys, and whatever assets and furniture, both marital and non-marital, she desired.
And whatever assets, both marital and non-marital, she desired. The evidence has shown that from the start, this defendant was very involved in managing Wendy's divorce. In October of 2012, defendant writes an email entitled "Things to Discuss at Your Mediation to Make Sure You Have in Writing for a Settlement," in which she refers to Wendy as a hostage and a prisoner in Tallahassee. That's what she believed. The email also includes the suggestion that Wendy pursue a restraining order against Dan Markel, that Wendy should go for mediation to make sure you have in writing for a settlement, in which she refers to Wendy as a hostage and a prisoner in Tallahassee. That's what she believed.
Okay, so the reason why I wanted to do this is because a lot of the evidence that was admitted into the trial was never published to the jury during the trial. And that's something that can happen. So the goal of the prosecutors often is to, in essence, admit the evidence, and it doesn't always get shown to the jury. So, for example, they didn't show the entire divorce file to the jury. It became part of the evidence, and then the jury gets to see it in the back during deliberations if they want to see it. But it also gives the opportunity to the prosecutor to use the portions that they want to bring the attention to the jury in the closing arguments. So we're seeing some of the stuff here that really wasn't explored in detail during the trial, or at least I didn't notice it. So, for example, right now, they're showing an email from Donna and Harvey Adelson to Wendy. It says, "For your eyes only, things to discuss with your lawyer." And again, it was funny how the defense was trying to argue that Donna wasn't involved. So this is obviously before the divorce became final, but it's a list of things to discuss at mediation to make sure that you have in writing for a settlement. So 1, ask for your husband to pay all or at least one half of the children's education after age 18. This must be in the divorce decree. Also ask for half of or all payment towards their bar mitzvahs and weddings. 2, make sure he's paying at least half of all extracurricular activities for the boys, music lessons, tennis lessons, baseball team activities, travel, and other expenses associated with these activities. Health insurance, make sure he provides coverage as well as paying at least half of copays and deductibles that are not covered by health insurance. All seems kind of reasonable so far. 4, no more talking to Danny unless it is through the lawyers. They will talk business. If he still comes to visit you at your office, not only should you absolutely go for a restraining order against him, but notify the university of the harassment that's going on. They won't like one of their professors doing that to another professor. So as you can see, okay, there is a feeling from Donna, apparently from Donna to Wendy about, being more forceful about supposedly Dan Markel coming to see her at the law school. I mean, we heard a voicemail, the last voicemail on the 18th of July, and he seemed like such a nice guy. But whatever, this is what's written on the text. So you can see that maybe because of whatever Wendy is reporting to Donna, okay, because we do not know if that's true or not, but Donna has some strong feelings about Danny harassing Wendy at the law school, and she's like, hey, you should go for a restraining order. Again, we do not know what really happened. We simply are reading an email from Donna to Wendy, and I'm assuming that Donna is getting all the information about what's going on from Wendy. So, 5, go for full custody with relocation negotiated along with living in South Florida. I'm sure your lawyer is smart enough to step out of the box and be a creative negotiator. First, see how much alimony you're getting. That depends on how much you earn and how long you've been married. Then you tell him that you have opportunities elsewhere and you want to move and take the children. Make a reasonable financial concession to accomplish this, whether it be paying for his airline tickets up to a certain amount once a month for him to visit with the children for a weekend. So where is this hostage at Tallahassee and prisoner in Tallahassee? Maybe it's a little bit down the line because it's not, I don't see that here, but it is highlighted on the right side of the screen. Interesting.
Email also includes the suggestion that Wendy pursue a restraining order against Dan Markel, that Wendy should go for 100% full custody of those two kids and relocation, and the threat of this conversion to Christianity. Quote, if he...
Oh, okay. Okay, so go for full custody with relocation. Negotiate on, okay. I'm trying to see, I still didn't see that about prisoner in Tallahassee. Okay. So 8. Okay, so they're down to number 8, and we don't have 8 on this email that is shown on the left side. So 8, they say, if he leaves you in Tallahassee, Tally, the children would not be attending a Hebrew day school, nor be brought up kosher or religious in any way. That's not a threat, just a warning. So we don't have the full email, I guess, so we're missing some parts. Let's see if they're going to show it later.
He leaves you in Tallahassee. The children will not be attending Hebrew day school. That's not a threat, just a warning. A warning that her friend, Miss Cunningham, on the stand dismissed. Oh, that was just a foolish thing to say, right? But the characterization of these threats as, you know, just something that was a one-off heat of passion thing has been completely destroyed by the evidence in this case, because she repeats it. She plans it with a lot of specificity. Wendy even admitted that her mom was serious about planning a baptism for these kids to change their religion as a ruse to try to strong-arm Dan Markel into giving up those kids. This is an example of the defendant operating with the emotional subterfuge as described by her daughter, Wendy Adelson. Also remember how her son, Rob, described her. She has rigid and fixed ideas of what she wants. And as long as you comply, things are fine. But when you don't comply, things are not fine. Wendy even admitted that if Dan had relented and moved to South Florida, or at least allowed her to move there, they might have co-parented happily ever after. But Dan did not comply, so things were definitely not fine. The defendant ends this email with, quote, "We will help you in any way possible for you to come here." In October, this defendant drafted language for Wendy's petition to relocate, including allegations that Wendy had been upset about having to live in Tallahassee since 2005, and a mention of putting the boys in a Christian school and on a non-kosher diet. Again, that's not a threat, just a reality. And the suggestion that the boys live in South Florida with Wendy and Dan just fly back and forth to see his kids, you know. He can just come see him every other weekend by airplane. Doesn't that sound like an amicable, equal time sharing that the lawyers for the defense described was going on here? Wendy's lawyer says she had no knowledge of Wendy's mom being involved in her divorce, but the evidence shows she absolutely was. Wendy sends the proposed petition for relocation from her lawyer to the defendant with a note that says, "Here it is, let's edit." And the defendant responds the next day with detailed feedback, including an argument that Dan Markel is incapable of taking care of his own children and that Wendy should seek 100% custody. Arguments which Wendy forwarded to her lawyer as her own. And upon receiving the lawyer's answer, she sends the lawyer's answer back to the defendant. That's in evidence. Defendant's thoughts about Wendy's earning potential and her work environment in Tallahassee. Arguments about she'd be better off with this other job that's higher paying in Miami. And defendant says she's been living in Tallahassee, that she, the defendant, has been living in Tallahassee since the petition was filed to help Wendy with the boys. In January of 2013, the defendant advises Wendy on her amended petition to relocate. And this is where the argument is raised about the job as a major bargaining chip in the divorce. The defendant writes here that Dan needs to know that there's no way in hell Wendy is going to stay at FSU. On January 14th, Wendy files an amended petition with request to relocate, which you can read and see. The petition contains many of the defendant's arguments. She couches this relocation in terms of not only important, but like a matter of life and death. Look at these quotes. It will create a major negative change in our lives. It will ruin your entire life. The rest of all our lives, mine, Dad's, and even Charlie's, will be affected by how well she can perform and act before July 31st to try to get this relocation thing turned around. Donna has even started pre-screening men for Wendy to date in the Miami area. In February, Dan files his response to Wendy's motion. Dad's and even Charlie's will be affected by how well she can perform and act before July 30th to help Wendy with the boys. In January of 2013, the defendant advises Wendy on her amended petition to relocate. And this is where the argument is raised about the job as a major bargaining chip in the divorce. The defendant writes here that Dan needs to know that there's no way in hell Wendy is going to stay at FSU. On January 14th, Wendy files an amended petition with request to relocate, which you can read and see. The petition contains many of the defendant's arguments. She couches this relocation in terms of not only important, but like a matter of life and death.
Wanted to pause this for a second so we can look through it. Okay, so this again, I guess, are emails from Donna to Wendy about stuff to suggest to put into the petition to amend the petition for dissolution to include relocation. So these are all things that Donna has suggested Wendy include in that document. And then, if you recall, her attorney was saying that Donna wasn't involved. And yet, all those things that Donna was recommending for Donna made their way into the motion, such as don't let his temporary move to Tallahassee ruin your entire life, the rest of your life, and consequently Dad's, mine, and yes, even Charlie's will be affected by how well you can perform, act before July 31st. You need to look into the future with what a life without your only family nearby, teaching in Tallahassee with Danny always in the picture, will give you. It's not a pretty picture. Now, this is very damning, that particular email going on the issue of motive, right? I mean, if it says that, you need to look into the future, what a life without your only family nearby, teaching in Tallahassee with Danny always in the picture, will give you. It's not a pretty picture. It will create a major negative change in our lives. So they were really invested into this war with Dan Markel.
Look at these quotes. It will create a major negative change in our lives. It will ruin your entire life. The rest of all our lives, mine, Dad's, and even Charlie's, will be affected by how well she can perform and act before July 31st to try to get this relocation thing turned around. Donna has even started pre-screening men for Wendy to date in the Miami area. In February, Dan files his response to Wendy's motion to relocate, alleging Wendy took his stuff when she left. The sole reason for relocation is to be close to her mother and family in South Florida, and that contrary to what Wendy put in her pleading, he was not seeking to leave FSU. He wasn't trying to move. Wendy failed to comply with their seeking to leave FSU. He wasn't trying to move. Wendy failed to comply with their Skype agreement, that Wendy exhibited deceitful behavior, made false statements, showed a lack of integrity, and had unclean hands. Those are some pretty nasty words. Maybe not the worst thing that the defense experts ever seen, but pretty nasty. Dan Markel requests sole decision-making authority for these kids regarding education, medical, and religious matters. The defense lawyer witnesses said, oh, that was never going to work. Maybe that's true. But these were concerns that Dan Markel took seriously. There's tons of discussions in evidence in these binders before you, in the pleadings and in the emails, about Dan Markel's desire to raise these boys in accordance with his faith and his concerns that his wishes were going to go right out the window as soon as the boys went over to be with Wendy or her mother. And defendant took this matter seriously too. She made it crystal clear in these emails that she had no respect for these boys' fathers' wishes for them regarding religious practices. In this email, defendant says she's sitting at Wendy's kitchen table working on Wendy's response to the filing we just talked about that Dan Markel made. So much for her having no involvement in her daughter's divorce.
Yeah, that was my bad. I think I was reading some of those texts and I was on mute so you guys couldn't hear me. But this is, can't see very well, but it seems to be an email from Donna to a friend. The highlighted portion says, I'm sitting here at the kitchen table in Wendy's house working on her response to Danny's response to her relocation petition. Then it says, Dear Ronnie, thanks for sharing this. I needed that little bit of laughter. Seriously, I'm sitting here at the kitchen table in Wendy's house working on her response to Danny's response to her relocation petition. It is filled with outright lies, horrible things about Wendy, and in general, anything he could possibly think up to make her look bad. Interestingly enough, he wrote it himself, which was obvious to those of us who know him, and yet his attorney signed off on it. Yes, that's illegal, but according to Wendy's attorney, Danny is threatening his own attorney to report him to the Florida bar. Oh my gosh. This is crazy. God only knows what's going on with that. However, there are a million things that need refuting, and I'm working on looking up information for her to do this. By the way, the statement that she says that it is illegal for an attorney to sign something that someone else wrote, that is absolutely false. You know, I think that what she's saying is that Dan Markel obviously helped write the paper, maybe wrote most of it, but the attorney, by putting his signature, says that he reviews it, he agrees with it, and so that's his paper, so he's the one responsible for, ethically speaking, for doing that. So that is not illegal. That's silly. So it would be illegal if Dan Markel signed the lawyer's name without him knowing. So anyway, it is so sad because all she wants out of this is to relocate to South Florida, where she has us and Charlie. Danny is making it very difficult, very, very difficult. But all we can do is continue to research this and do as much work for her as possible to try to allow this to happen. He has no family support up here for a 2 and 3 year old, and frankly, neither will Wendy. And she was offered the job at a law firm which pays considerably more than she is currently receiving at the law school. But this has to go to court. She is finally received the date for her hearing before a judge, May 9, 2013. According to Florida law, they must go to mediation sometime before that. Danny actually refused to go to mediation as it will cost him money, but the judge just responded with a note that it is mandatory that they do this before the May 9th hearing. Wendy has so much work to do for this divorce, aside from her regular job and her children, that she feels that she has a full-time third job. Just terrible. Sorry, I guess Wendy is also writing stuff because it's a third job, right? Sorry, I don't mean to lay it on you, but you and Sherry have been wonderful every time we have spoken. I know that because you have been through this, you both understand. Anyway, back to work. Love you guys, Donna. And sorry, I think I have read the previous stuff that was being shown on the screen, but I was on mute.
She says in this email to a friend, all Wendy wants out of this is to relocate to South Florida, where she has us and Charlie. Danny is making it very difficult. On March 5th, 2013, defendant sends a long email in response to every paragraph. A friend, all Wendy wants out of this is to relocate to South Florida, where she has us and Charlie. Danny is making it very difficult. On March 5th, 2013, defendant sends a long email in response to every paragraph of Dan Markel's arguments against relocation, including that Dan's religious practices are fanatical and dangerous to the boys, and that Dan Markel is psychologically unfit to have custody of his children. It's not sounding very amicable, is it? In opening statements, the defendant's attorney acknowledged that Dan Markel was an intelligent, accomplished professor and a dedicated father, and the state could not agree more. But the evidence has shown that her client didn't agree with that.
All right, so a request. So this is from things that were in that Donna wrote to Wendy to include in her response. I request that a psychological evaluation be made of my husband. His religious practices, which are forced upon our boys, are sick and dangerous to their well-being. He is indoctrinating them, not teaching them. I'm extremely concerned about his mental issues and the results of which causing mental and physical harm to my boys. This is all Wendy suggesting, all Donna suggesting that Wendy include this, I guess. That he has a history of recurring and persistent issues with vertigo, rendering him incapable of taking care of himself, no less two small and needy children. I'm extremely concerned about the well-being of our children in regard to husband's fanatical and extremist religious beliefs. I truly believe that his psychological disorder, mental illness, is affecting his fitness or capacity to parent, and I wish to protect my children from him. So, as you can see, what's going on in that divorce is they're really throwing punches at each other. You saw that
Donna Adelson repeatedly paints Dan Markel as a self-important idiot who's not fit to care for his own children.
Exactly. So it is an attack back and forth with, I guess, Donna fueling the responses or making suggestions to Wendy about nasty responses and nasty, I guess, supposed counterattacks to what she perceives to be false or nasty allegations from Dan Markel.
On March 6, 2013, Dan Markel sends Wendy an email threatening to take her to court over her failure to cooperate with the Skype thing. That comes up repeatedly. Here he says, you've made zero efforts to facilitate that when you or your mother could have easily done so. I don't want conflict or tension. I desperately want peace and joy. Please let that happen, but do repeatedly.
Okay, so I do want to read this. So this is from Wendy Adelson to Donna and Harvey, Donna Adelson. Even though it says Donna and Harvey, then it says Donna Adelson. So, and then it forwards. So this is Wendy sending to Donna, her mom, which I guess Wendy really wants her mom to be involved in all of this. So she forwards a message from Dan Markel to her. It says the latest, right, in the forwarding email. And so Dan Markel wrote to Wendy, including a copy to Christine Adamson and Thomas Duggar. Those were the attorneys. Thomas would be Dan Markel's lawyer at the time, and Christine Adamson would be Wendy Adelson's lawyer at the time. And it says, Wendy, I hope this note finds you well. Your recent letter the other day on February 28 or so, and by the way, this is March 6, 2013, so this is before they settled the divorce. The other day on February 28 or so, you dropped off at my office the attached undated letter, which indicates that you only agree to the trip to Canada for Passover on the following conditions. Passover 2014, March 11, 2013, and the new schedule for April. I guess they were negotiating travel with the kids by Dan Markel to Canada. As you should recall from our written and verbal correspondence earlier this fall of 2012, my having the boys for the week of Passover was in exchange for you having them for 8 nights over Thanksgiving of 2012, when you took them to Disney World. We have already worked that out and reached an agreement. Accordingly, if your attached letter signals your intent to depart from that agreement, and thus if you're not willing to hand over the passport for our son and sign and notarize the attached permission letter for both children by Tuesday, March 12, 2013, I will file immediately for an emergency order as well as an order granting litigation costs and other relief that the court may find appropriate to address this breach of the agreement. So as you can see, they had an agreement. They worked something out, a give or take. Then Markel allowed Wendy to keep the kids for a prolonged period so she could go to Disney because she wanted to take them to Disney. And then in exchange, she had agreed for Dan Markel to take the children to Canada during Passover. And now she's kind of withdrawing from that agreement. Then here, what are these? Okay, so specifically, the period you did not adhere to our communication agreement at all. And let me make sure that I'm on volume. Okay, so I have volume. Good. Okay, so what are these? Specifically, in the period of January 27 to 30 and February 24 to 27, you did not adhere to our communication agreement at all. I think Georgia Kaplan is going to read that, the highlighted portions. So I'm going to go to the unhighlighted. I know the boys want to speak to you, and I'm happy to co-parent whenever you are. I don't want conflict or tension. I desperately want peace and joy. Please let that happen. But do not mistake. Okay, so Georgia did read all that. So let's go back to Georgia.
Here he says, you've made zero efforts to facilitate that when you or your mother could have easily done so. I don't want conflict or tension. I desperately want peace and joy. Please let that happen, but do not mistake my politeness or desire for cooperation as a lack of firmness. I will not tolerate failures on your part to keep our agreements. They did have a Skype agreement, and she was violating it, and he was furious about it. This email was forwarded by Wendy to this defendant, so she knows about all this stuff. Dan Markel sent Wendy an email in December, which was pretty personal, and in which he is kind of a mea culpa. He apologizes for things that went wrong in the marriage and takes some accountability for what he views as his mistakes in the marriage. And Wendy forwards this email to her mother. Then Donna responds to this personal email and goes through Dan Markel's writings paragraph by paragraph.
Okay, so I don't know that I'm going to be able to read this, but as you can see, there is a very long email. Well, there are several emails here. Sorry, I guess I'm not going to be able to see it because they're all cut off, except for. But what we can see is that. So Dan Markel sent an email to Wendy, apologizing for some things, maybe trying to improve the relationship. And Donna Adelson apparently is suggesting responses paragraph by paragraph. So I'm just going to go to the ones on the right, all the way to the right that we can read. Page 4, paragraph 7. Open quotations. There is no one in the world more motivated than I am for you to be happy and successful in your career and in life. Close quotation. So that must be Dan Markel writing about Wendy, right? There's no one in the world more motivated than I am for you to be happy and successful in your career and in your life. So Dan Markel wants Wendy to be happy. That's what he's saying. And then Donna writes in parentheses, this shows that he wants the best for me. That's relocation to a new and significantly better job, one that will provide a better lifestyle with greater educational and social opportunities for the boys. Oh, I see. So she's trying to suggest how Wendy can use some of the things that he wrote and do a counter argument, I guess. Next one. I will tell everyone always that I've made terrible mistakes. Close quotations, right? I'm assuming that's from Wendy. And then I guess Donna writes, he told our mutual faculty members and friends that I'm mentally ill. So I guess I'm guessing now, and maybe Georgia will explain it better. But I think that, and I'll go back for a couple of seconds. I think that this is not Wendy writing it, but it's Donna pretending to be Wendy and saying how Wendy should respond or things that Wendy should think about in response to that. So then I think Donna is writing. or maybe, well, I'm guessing. I'm going to listen to what Georgia says again. But he told our mutual faculty members and friends that I am mentally ill because I took the children and left him without any warning, and that I am a thief taking his money, jewelry, and furniture. Yes, he made many terrible mistakes. Ruining my name in our mutual workplace was a major one. He has made it almost impossible for me to have any credibility in this workplace. I work in an environment where budget cuts and decision as to the merit of law school clinics create an unknown factor as to whether or not my job, which is not a tenured position, will be renewed on a semester to semester basis. In these difficult economic times, the job offer I have in South Florida is unique and one that should not be lost to a job with no real permanence to it. So that's I'm wondering. And then there's also something about the Fidelity, the UTMA account with Fidelity. Interesting. I wish I had the full emails. So I'll just go back for a second here and let Georgia explain what's going on. She's going to be a lot briefer, though. Not as much a deep dive as I'm trying to do here, but let's listen in.
Some accountability for what he views as his mistakes in the marriage. And Wendy forwards this email to her mother. Then Donna responds to this personal email and goes through Dan Markel's writings paragraph by paragraph, suggesting how Wendy can manipulate his words against him. Oh, look, he's admitting this here. This will help you in the divorce. And she does it in Wendy's voice. It's weird. Look at it. So although sometimes Wendy seems to be complaining about her mom overstepping, she's trampling my autonomy, it's like she's also inviting her mother into her business and wants her help, but also don't trample my autonomy. In fact, Wendy thanked her mom for the thoughts that she gave on this letter Dan Markel wrote. She also wrote that she never would have left Dan Markel without her mom's support. In May of 2013, the defendant refers to one of Dan Markel's responses as a, quote, 23-page rant. Then she doubles down on relocation as the most important and non-negotiable part of Wendy's divorce. I mean, how many times does she have to tell y'all it's important, but somehow the defense is still, it wasn't important, or it was over. It didn't matter. She notes here that Dan Markel threatened Wendy with federal kidnapping charges. He threatened her daughter with federal kidnapping charges for taking those kids without telling him where she was going when she left. The defendant signs off, "I'm too angry to write anymore." And the evidence has shown that this nice, normal, sweet little grandma certainly was angry. To support the argument that Wendy should be able to relocate because Dan was always traveling on work trips, the defendant sends Wendy this email, and it contains every date, like the date ranges that Dan Markel has been out of town.
That's interesting. So here's the info I had on travel since Ben was born. And as we know, she keeps meticulous calendars. And here she uses the information in the calendar to show all the trips that Dan Markel took from when to when in 2010, 2011, 2012. As you can see, there's some notes afterwards. Danny away, same time you had a conference in blah, blah, blah. Then in New York University. I think he was in DC, but he was definitely out of town. Family here in Coral Springs. Then he was away on computer. Not even watching the boys swim lessons or something like that. Colorado conference. Israel teaching time. So.
I'm traveling for work since the birth of their first child. That's 4 years. She is able to go back and send to Wendy, he was out of town this date to this date, this date to this date. It's a little shocking that she recorded that information, but we know she is a very detailed person. She keeps these extremely detailed day planners. But Dan Markel's travel schedule is of particular interest. In fact, in light of the fact that the hitmen knew that Dan Markel had to be killed on July 18th because he was going out of town the next day. The question is how they get that information. Who had that information? Then the next day, Dan Markel files a memo of law asking for the attorney's fees and saying that, quote, if costs are not awarded, Then the wife and her affluent parents, who are bankrolling the wife's litigation so they can enjoy closer access to the grandchildren, will persist in vexatious and groundless litigation. Dan Markel knew that Wendy's parents and their considerable resources were a big part of why this divorce litigation was dragging on. They thought he was filing frivolous stuff to drag out the divorce and the proceedings, and he thought the same thing about them. On June 21st, the court issued the order denying relocation. When Wendy was on the stand, the defense made a big deal out of, oh, you didn't tell mom it was final, did you? You stipulated to it.
So the order says, this court does not find that the wife has met her burden of proof that a relocation is in the best interest of the minor children. As such, the parties stipulate to the denial with prejudice of the wife's petition to relocate with the minor children.
Didn't you, which we later learned was because the judge had already ruled at sidebar that it wasn't going to happen. But basically, you kept your poor mom in the dark and she thought this was still something that was viable and you didn't tell her it wasn't. But on redirect, it was proven that that was not true. Defendant did know that the order was final and she expressed this in an email to her friends. Poor mom wasn't kept in the dark on anything in this family. In fact,
so this is an email from Donna Adelson to Barry and Vicky Kligerman, and it says, not in the mood to talk right now and hope you'll understand. Wendy's hearing for relocation was denied. No chance at the appellate level for an appeal. We're all very disappointed. We'll talk soon. I promise. Love, Donna. June 25.
Defendant recognized perfectly well that this order meant she wasn't going to get relocation through the courts. She wasn't going to get what she wanted through the legal system, but that wasn't the only way to skin a cat, was it? She wasn't deterred by a loss in court. Instead, she started looking into other options to get a win for the Adelson family. There was testimony offered that everyone knew that there was a slim chance of Wendy winning relocation. Maybe everyone knew that on the lawyer's side, but the defendant didn't know that.
I'm interrupting, but I'm going to read the full email. Unfortunately, so this is from Donna to Karen Brooks, whoever that is. Unfortunately, after paying a lawyer $600 an hour for 10 months of case preparation, the judge listened to Wendy testify for 1 hour. Then one of the partners from the Miami law firm that offered Wendy an amazing job flew up to testify on her behalf. And the judge took a break and asked one question. I'm not hearing about any physical abuse by the father. Has he been pulling out their toenails? When Wendy said no, the judge says, well, then I've made up my mind. No physical abuse, no relocation. That was it. Nothing that her lawyer had prepared over all these months was even listened to. All that judge cared about was whether the children had been physically abused. Outrageous. Even the Miami lawyer who had heard her said it was bizarre. So at the moment, she would not be allowed to relocate. Unless at some point in the future, Danny chooses to move. If he chooses to move, then Wendy can relocate. How's that for fair? Anyway, if I sound angry, it is because I am. We're all very upset and cannot believe the outcome. Sorry, I didn't mean to respond this way, but I am beyond angry.
She was not happy about this loss in court. Here she laments, unfortunately, after paying a lawyer $600 an hour for 10 months, case preparation, the judge listened to Wendy for 1 hour and made up her mind. Outrageous. So at the moment, we will not be allowed to relocate. Note the phrase, at the moment. Jibbers had not beaten the Adelson family yet. Defendant concludes this email anyway. If I sound angry, it's because I am. We're all very upset and cannot believe the outcome. She couldn't believe relocation was denied. When Wendy expresses defeat over the court's order, the defendant isn't having it. She encourages Wendy to never, never, never give up, to take control, to not let Jibbers think he's won anything by having you remain in.
It is time for action. Let me make sure that I'm not mute. Good, I'm not mute. It is time for action. It is time to take control of your life and not let Jibbers think he's just won anything by having you remain in Tallahassee, 8 hours away from the only family you have, and lose out on what will be a job that will afford you and your children advantages that they will never otherwise be able to enjoy. Let's show this F what will make him absolutely miserable. You know his weak points: money, religion, control. You have 5 weeks before your court date. I know you have a job that keeps you very busy. However, the rest of your life, and consequently Dad's and mine, and yes, even Charlie's, will be affected by how well you can act before July 31st. You can be a good actress when you want to. I've seen you in action. You need to put on the performance of your life. Jibbers hasn't beaten the Adelson family yet. You have a very strong family behind you. Just remember that. Dad and I have done everything we could to try to help you for the last 10 months. Now it's time to help yourself.
Tallahassee, and to show this fucker what will make him absolutely miserable. How amicable.
We believe that you will be able to make this happen if you can put these actions before everything else this next month, and you know that you have only got the kids a limited number of days to do this. We believe that Jibbers will be saying, "Stop this," and you will be telling him, "You wanted me in Tallahassee. My children are going to fit in this Bible Belt. They're going to church every time I have them. I'm having them privately tutored at home to get them caught up for the Sunday school classes that I've registered them in for the fall."
Then defendant solicits Wendy to put on the
for the fall. The class time coincides with the service I'll be attending. Tell him that you've got a new outlook on life and a new hope, that you'd like to go to heaven. Perhaps he would like to join you and the boys at church.
performance of her life, because Jibbers hadn't beaten the Adelson family yet. And this is where defendant reveals her plan of action, including having her Jewish grandsons baptized and then defendant solicits Wendy to put on the performance of her life, because Jibbers hadn't beaten the Adelson family yet. And this is where defendant reveals her plan of action.
Take photo of the boys dressed nicely, standing at the front door or by the sign of a Tallahassee church. Then change your Facebook status photo to this one so everyone will see this. Perhaps a line under the photo with "New beginnings in Tallahassee" might be nice. Within minutes, Jibbers should either see this or will be getting calls from friends and acquaintances about this.
Including having her Jewish
How happy do you think he will be? This is pretty sickening.
grandsons baptized and offering $1 million to Dan Markel to facilitate this relocation. Control is a theme that's featured prominently throughout this email and throughout this case, because Jibbers hadn't beaten the Adelson family yet. And this is where defendant reveals her plan of action, including having her Jewish grandsons baptized and offering $1 million to Dan Markel to facilitate this relocation. Control is a theme.
Okay, so we already read all this. Oh, let Jibbers know that the children will be baptized in a Catholic church. Oh, no. 2, make arrangements to get the boys caught up with a private tutor, teenage Catholic church member, who will come to the house to teach the young men about Jesus. If you don't have time to arrange for this to happen, I will happily do it for you. She or he will serve as a good babysitter assistant for you while you're preparing dinner, etc. 3, let Jibbers know that your children will be baptized in the Catholic Church. And you certainly invite him to the event. Let him know that the Catholic Church is a big part of your life now with the boys, and you would like him to be a part of it. As long as he wants you to remain in Tallahassee, the boys will.
Theme that's featured prominently throughout this email and throughout this case. There is evidence that the defendant controlled Wendy, she controlled Harvey.
Take control from him. We want him ticked off so he realized that he could lose control over his kids. It's time for action. It's time to take control of your life and not let Jibbers think he's just won anything by having you remain in Tallahassee. Don't allow Jibbers to have this power and control over them. Then in reality, he's going to have the same control over you. If you dress your kids up in Hitler Youth uniforms and brought them down here, I could care less if it was an act of defiance and would show Jibbers that he's not in control.
And she controlled Charlie, but she could not control Dan Markel. He wasn't going to give her a win. As long as you went along with her rigid, fixed ideas, things were fine. But if you didn't, things were not fine. Defendant continues to react to relocation being denied and Wendy's inclination to give up on the matter, including, everyone has a price. Now is the time to start. You said that.
Okay, let me read this. So this is from Donna Adelson to Wendy Adelson, and it says, "Dear Wendy, since neither one of us feels up to talking, let me share with you that what we're all feeling as far as your response. When I wrote to you this morning, we felt that you had reasonable thoughts as to what the judge might do or say or think regarding the charade we had hoped you would participate in. However, the more we think about that, we begin to realize that you and we have no idea what this judge will do or say or think. Who would have thought, after paying an attorney $600 an hour for 10 months, she would take an hour and a half of testimony, not even bother calling Jibbers to the stand, and decide that family support for very young children evidently means nothing, and the job that pays 10 times what your unsecured, untenured, and dependent upon state budget cuts job pays in Tallahassee will be just fine for your children. Does she care that after expenses you save next to nothing at the end of the year? Does she care that very little, if anything, will be put away for the children for their current and future education? Does she care that the extracurricular activities, sports, trips, eating out in restaurants will always be a financial challenge for you to provide for the boys? Clearly, she did not take into consideration the future earning potential and benefit for your children. She didn't care that there is no backup support system when one of your preschoolers is sick. All she cared about was if the father hadn't been pulling out their toenails. You should give up any financial betterment for you and your children and raise them in a place that you agreed to go to because Jibbers only had FSU as a job offer. Of course, as a graduate of FSU Law School and a native of Tallahassee, she sees nothing wrong with living there. Obviously, as a native of South Florida, You know better. Our point is, it is obvious that you and Kristen haven't figured out the judge so far. You were both shocked at the rapid decision based on nothing that was presented. So, how do you think at this point you can figure out what the judge will say regarding your decision to introduce Christianity into the boys' lives? People go to prison and change their religion all the time. People go through difficult times and find Jesus. Jesus was Jewish. He had positive teachings. He gives people hope. And best of all, you get to go to heaven in the end. Sounds good to me. Obviously, it will sound good to Judge Hobbs. She goes to church. There were multiple donations from her church pastors and ministers on her financial contributions website. She's a Southern Black lady. How do you know it won't?
This divorce is not about winning and losing, and it's not a competition.
Okay.
You've already lost relocation according to the legal system. Well, it is about winning and losing. We're trying to get a win. You deserve it. You deserve so much more than a life without family, teaching in Tallahassee. Life is tough if you don't stand up and
So it says, how do you know this won't be music to her ears to hear this? And by the way, Judge Barbara Hobbs, I have a full case involving Judge Barbara Hobbs. She's the lady who was a judge, who is still a judge here in the Second Judicial Circuit. Hold on.
take a chance, you don't stand a chance. Please, Wendy, do your part and stand up to him. Make an effort to do this so that our group offer will stand a better chance of being accepted. Don't let this temporary move to Tallahassee ruin your entire life. Fight for yourself, Wendy. We'll be there to help you. Just don't tell us that what you need to do is move forward with a sense of peace. Can't have that, can we? That's giving up.
Okay, so let me continue about Judge Barbara Hobbs. And by the way, I'm going to go to about 32, 33 minutes or maybe 35 minutes into this opening statement. I'm sorry, closing argument, to the section where she starts talking about Halloween 2013. And when she finishes with that, then I'll stop for tonight. But Judge Barbara Hobbs, she has a son, an adult son, who shot his girlfriend through the bedroom door, and she survived. But he shot her with a shotgun, with a very powerful weapon, not a shotgun. And so he was taken to the interrogation room at the Tallahassee Police Department, I believe it was. And then her mom came to the interrogation room, served as his attorney. This became a huge problem. And so she faced ethical charges for that issue, and eventually got a suspension and a fine, and then continued to serve as a judge here in the Second Judicial Circuit. So that's the judge they're talking about. And curiously, right around the time of the murder of Dan Markel, there was a change in judges. So Judge Barbara Hobbs was going to be no longer the judge in the post-divorce litigation between the two of them. And instead, it was going to be Judge Jonathan Strostrom. And if you are a follower of this channel, then you know that name and why that is quite amusing.
Giving up on relocation was not an option for Donna Adelson. Neither was losing. Throughout the trial, the defense tried to distance themselves from these emails. One of the ways they did that was by trying to put them off on Harvey. They pointed out, hey, this is a joint email account. One of these is signed mom and dad. And there's a few that are signed mom and dad, but it's clear that the defendant is the author of these emails and that she's the one driving the bus on this relocation effort. And during the presentation, we highlight all the dad and I language, all the indications in there that Donna is the author as opposed to Harvey being the author. According to her own daughter, Wendy, she's the dominant force in that household. And according to her son, Rob, she is a controlling person as opposed to the more passive, go with the flow type of personality that the dad, Harvey, has. In opening, the defense attorney told you that this defendant was a normal person, and you don't have to decide she's not a normal person. You're the judge of the facts, right? Was a crime committed? Is this the person that committed the crime? But in this email, she suggests that dressing her Jewish grandchildren up in Hitler youth uniforms would be acceptable. That would accomplish her goals. The ends justify the means for her, people. That is illustrated here, and it sums up this entire case. The defendant wanted this done because that was the only way left to get a win. If he had submitted, if he'd let her take those kids, he'd be alive. If he'd moved to South Florida himself, he'd be alive. But he would not submit. She could not get that win. He was a huge problem, and she made it Charlie's problem. To Charlie, who liked the idea of being a tough guy, who had connections to people on the wrong side of the tracks, the price of Dan Markel's life was worth the reward of pleasing his mother and easing her diarrhea and getting her to finally shut up about Wendy's divorce. In the mind of this defendant, all their lives depended on the success of this relocation effort. She tells you as much herself in these emails. Listen to her. And as such, any and all means were justified. Because not everything one has to do in life is comfortable or easy. Sometimes it's ridiculously hard. This.
Okay, I don't know, guys, if you want me to be doing these readings or not, but I kind of wanted to. So I advised in the very beginning of this thing that I was going to do a little bit of a deeper dive. So I kind of want to look through the evidence. So here's an email from Donna to Wendy, June 27, 2013. So this is very close to the time of the resolution of the case where they had a settlement. Says, dear Wendy, since neither one of us feels up to talking, let me share with you what we're all feeling as far as your response. Oh, we already read this, so no need to do that.
Is what passes for normal in this family. I said the defendant made Wendy's divorce Charlie's problem, and the evidence shows that the defendant did keep Charlie in the loop every step of the way. Here's a July 10th email that states, just to catch you up on what's happening with Wendy, and discusses who should be involved in the bribe that the family wants to offer. Is not buried. Things were not fine. Let Jibbers think he's won anything by having you remain in Tallahassee. The fighting did continue. Because not everything one has to do in life is comfortable or easy. Sometimes it's ridiculously hard. This is what passes for normal in this family. I said the defendant made Wendy's divorce Charlie's problem, and the evidence shows that the defendant did keep Charlie in the loop every step of the way. Here's a July 10th email that states, just to catch you up on what's happening with Wendy, and discusses who should be involved in the bribe that the family wants to offer to Dan Markel. On July 19th, the defendant requests, and Wendy sends her copies of the motions, responses, orders, and transcripts from her divorce so far. That same day, Dan Markel makes a settlement offer that this defendant encourages Wendy to reject, saying the answer is no to all of this. Please, Wendy, we've been with you from day one. Do not accept or sign anything without the two of us reviewing and discussing all of this with you. Screwing him financially is what will aggravate him. But ultimately, a settlement is reached. You all have heard about this date, July 31st, 2013. But contrary to what the defense has told you, the fighting did continue. On October 12th of 2013, 3 months after the divorce was final, the defendant forwards an email to Charlie Adelson, which Dan Markel had sent Wendy.
I found it interesting that she just said that screwing him financially was going to set him off about Dan Markel. And in the end, all that post-divorce litigation was about the fact that he was alleging that they were screwing with him financially. So...
And the defendant adds the note, this is what this fucker is sending your sister on a regular basis. He is absolutely crazy. Impossible. Does it sound like everything was over? And the defendant adds.
I'm going to read that one. So this is this is Donna writing to Charlie. This is right before Halloween 2013 when Charlie talks to Katie about finding, does she know somebody that can hurt someone. So it says, this is what this fucker is sending to your sister on a regular basis. He's absolutely crazy, by the way. RFR means right of first refusal. Impossible, blah, blah, blah.
The note, this is what this fucker is sending your sister on a regular basis. He is absolutely crazy. Impossible. Does it sound like everything was over? This was the amicable divorce over? Not contentious at all, right? This is fall of 2013, the same time frame in which Wendy starts dating Jeff Lacoste and Charlie starts dating Catherine Magbanua. On October 13th, 2013,
so isn't that like, so, it demonstrates how skillful Georgia Kaplan was to weave into her closing arguments so much of what the defense did that went wrong, right? And so the defense strategy in opening statements, and they kind of tried to do it through the end, but they failed miserably because they called those two witnesses, the divorce lawyer and the expert, who totally trashed that Markel. But that theme of this was not an amicable, that this was an amicable situation after the issue of the relocation was resolved, that this whole argument is like so absurd and is getting destroyed with actual evidence that got admitted into the case. So it's like, what was this defense thinking? What was the defense thinking? How were they going to argue this to the contrary, where there's so much stuff that shows this nastiness between the nastiness that resides in Donna's heart, right? How did they think that they were not losing credibility by making that argument? I just don't get it. Horrible evening for your sister and for us. Dad finally had to walk outside to lower his blood pressure. Just awful. I can't even explain. I bet. Let's talk this week.
defendant texts Charlie Adelson, quote, horrible evening for your sister. The pattern of this defendant getting worked up about Wendy's divorce and then forwarding it on to Charlie is seen over and over again. Which brings us to Halloween 2013. Several important events in the case occur on Halloween 2013. One, Wendy officially takes Dan Markel back to court, filing her motion to enforce the marital settlement agreement. So she's alleging he violated it, and she's asking to hold him in contempt of court, alleging that he's not paid the agreed upon fees that he was supposed to pay by a certain deadline. Wendy backs out of the contract that she had signed to buy a house in Tallahassee on Halloween 2013. Charlie later brags to the defendant that he talked Wendy out of buying the house, and the defendant calls him a miracle worker for having convinced Wendy not to buy the house in Tallahassee. Also, Charlie meets up with Catherine Magbanua on Lincoln Road on Halloween 2013, the same day Wendy pulled the plug on the house.
Losing again, right? It was mute. Sorry. But I'm trying to juggle. I didn't want to have too much background noise, and that's why I keep muting it. I probably should have just left it unmuted the whole time. So let me just get to the bottom line. 2012, October, is a significant date for Donna. Excuse me. So Halloween 2012, a year before, it was a significant date for Wendy and Dan Markel. They had an argument because Dan Markel and Wendy had agreed that that night Wendy was going to attend a particular party that Dan Markel was going to at a mutual friend's house because Dan Markel wanted to see the kids with their costumes on at the party. She agreed to this, and then she backed out and didn't take the kids. And this made Dan Markel very upset, and it led to some negative communications between Dan Markel and Wendy Adelson about that. And in fact, in her deposition in the divorce case, there was a lot of questions about that particular issue, about why did Wendy back out of this agreement, and about whether she had agreed to and why she backed out, and so on and so forth. So a year later is when a lot of things are happening that seem to be directly connected to the inception of the final plan of how to resolve this case, to go with the Hitman option through Katie Magbanua. And the things that happen has some significance. Of course, the filing of the document, of a very nasty document seeking to try to hold Dan Markel in contempt, in the divorce case, probably not a coincidence that it was filed on Halloween. I think it was exactly 1 year after that incident that really upset Dan Markel. So she wanted to upset him again for Halloween, probably. Just a guess. I can't say that 100%. But it seems like the prosecutor is also seeing this as some kind of connection to something going on that particular day. Also, there's those communications between Charlie and Donna, where Charlie is talking to Donna and saying that he talked to Wendy and was able to convince Wendy to not buy a house in Tallahassee. And you'll see that there's going to be argument later on, suggesting that that was done because Charlie had found a solution, had found a way to hire a hitman through Katie McBanua. And that then the next thing that he does that very same night when he asks Katie, do you have someone that can do this? And she says yes. He sends a picture of Katie to Wendy, which could be used, of course, if Wendy is also charged. I would be very interested to see the timing of those things. It wasn't something that Georgia focused on in the closing arguments. And if I were the defense attorney, I would know that all of this was going to come up at the trial, and I would want to see the issue of the timing. So I would want to see the timing of those communications about convincing Wendy not to buy a house in Tallahassee, and the timing of the email or the text where Charlie sent the photo of Katie to Wendy, and then compare that also to the timing of when supposedly Charlie and Katie had that conversation about whether she knew somebody that could hurt someone. So that's where we're going to close on Halloween 2013. I apologize for the mess ups where I had it on mute and I was telling you excellent thoughts I had, but you couldn't hear them. But Enzo was listening. Right, Enzo? He's sleeping. So anyway, that's it for tonight. I may, if the video does well, if you guys like it and comment and so on and so forth, I mean, I'll come back and continue doing this. If not, I'll do it on my own because I do want to study the closing arguments. And I want to see exactly what I'm actually looking for is to see the exact evidence that they had put together to build a case against Donna, and to see whether it could be used in any future prosecutions as well against someone else. As we all know, there may be one or two more people charged in this case with the same charges or lesser charges. We don't know. All right, everybody, thanks so much for being with me. But I should get some shut-eye for my regular job as a lawyer. So again, if you guys watch it and support the channel, and I see that there were obviously 4 people who were very kind and provided a contribution to us. So thanks again, Victoria Girl. Thank you, Alias, a very long-term contributor. Thank you, Daphne Lane. And thank you, Kristen, for becoming a new member. I know someone else had a question about how to become a member. And usually if you just go to the description of every video, so if you go down from a video and you open the description that is right below the video, if you don't have it on full screen, then you'll see some a description of what the video is about, and there's some links to different things, and that's where you're going to find the link and how to become a member of the channel. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Enzo is sleeping, otherwise I will bring him here to say goodnight to you guys. Have a good one. Mentor Lawyer. Bye-bye.